Welcome back to Back Then with Ben. Today, we're stepping into a part of American history most people never think about. The dining halls of orphanages 100 years ago. Imagine rows of wooden benches, metal trays clattering, and dozens of children saying grace before eating. These meals weren't glamorous. They were simple, cheap, and sometimes shocking. But they tell us everything about how kids survived in a world before fast food, frozen dinners, or even reliable electricity. Stick with me through all 25 meals, because the last one might just leave you speechless. One cornmeal mush with molasses. Picture this. It's a cold January morning in a 1920s orphanage. The kids are shivering in drafty dormitories. What's waiting for breakfast? A steaming pot of cornmeal mush, basically boiled corn grits, with a spoonful of sticky, dark molasses on top. It was cheap, filling, and gave kids the sugar rush they craved. But here's the hook. Orphans didn't see it as a treat. Day after day, the same mush. Imagine being a child who secretly dreams of pancakes or bacon, but only gets a watery bowl of yellow porridge. 2 cabbage and potato stew. At lunchtime, big kettles came out. Inside, a cabbage and potato stew that smelled as sour as it tasted. Why? Because cabbage was cheap. Potatoes lasted forever, and together they stretched into dozens of bowls. Some kids scarfed it down because they were starving. Others gagged at the mushy texture. Think about it. Would you eat the same cabbage potato stew 3 times a week? The orphans had no choice. 3 oatmeal with watered milk. Oatmeal sounds nice, right? But here's the twist. In orphanages, the milk was often watered down to make it last longer. Some records even show it was so thin, it was almost translucent. Imagine you're an 8-year-old, spoon in hand, watching the milk swirl like cloudy water around your oats. No cinnamon, no sugar, just survival in a bowl. 4 hard bread and drippings. Now here's a tough one. Day-old bread dipped in leftover pork or beef drippings. Basically hardened bread cubes dunked in grease. To the kids, it was a meal. To us today, it might sound more like scraps. But back then, it gave calories and fat. 2 things hungry children desperately needed. And here's the eerie part. Some orphans later wrote in journals that they loved this dish because the grease was the closest thing they got to flavor. 5-bean soup, a giant pot of beans, boiled with maybe an onion if they were lucky. That was dinner more often than not. Why beans? They were cheap, protein-rich, and easy to store. But for the kids, it wasn't exciting. Bean soup was so common that they nicknamed it the eternal pot. Some orphanages kept the same bean pot simmering for days, just adding water and more beans. Can you imagine eating from a stew that never really ended? 6 rice pudding with raisins. Finally, a rare moment of sweetness. Rice pudding with a sprinkle of raisins was considered a luxury in orphanages. It was creamy, warm, and sometimes the only dessert kids saw all month. But here's the kicker. Raisins back then weren't always fresh. Sometimes they were dried so hard you had to chew like leather. Still, for kids who lived on cabbage and mush, this was heaven in a bowl. 7 cold rice with milk. Leftover rice never went to waste. It was served the next morning, cold, with a splash of watered milk poured over it. If sugar was available, a sprinkle sweetened it up. But often, kids just ate it plain. Imagine starting your day with yesterday's rice, straight from the pot. Would you eat it without complaint or push it aside? 8 salt pork and cornbread. On rare occasions, orphanages got donations of salt pork. It was greasy, chewy, and heavily salted to last for months. Paired with dry cornbread, it became a special dinner. For many kids, this was the closest thing to Sunday comfort food. 9 vegetable scrap soup. This wasn't garden fresh soup. It was literally the scraps. Onion peels, carrot tops, celery ends, all boiled into a thin broth. Sometimes, kids said it was more water than food. Could you sip it gratefully? Or would the mystery bits floating around turn your stomach? 10 dandelion green salad. Yes, dandelions. The kind that grow in your yard. Orphanage staff often foraged for greens to stretch meals. Tossed with a little vinegar or salt, it became a bitter survival salad. Next time you mow the lawn, imagine it showing up on your dinner plate. 11 lard sandwiches. No butter? No problem. Orphanages spread plain lard on bread slices and called it lunch. It was pure fat, filling, but flavorless. Imagine biting into a sandwich where the spread tastes like greasy wax. Would you gag or wolf it down because you were starving? 12 liver and onions. Nutrient-rich but divisive. Liver was cheap and packed with iron. Cooked with onions. It was one of the few sources of meat kids saw regularly. Some kids hated it so much they pinched their noses while eating. Would you? 13 hominy grits. Hominy? Corn kernels soaked in lye. Was boiled into grits and served plain. Cheap, filling, and bland. It showed up often in southern orphanages. Picture spooning mouthful after mouthful of flavorless mush. Could you handle it? 14 stewed prunes. Dessert? Sometimes. Stewed prunes were soft, sticky, and tart. Orphanages used them as both a sweet and a natural medicine for kids with stomach troubles. Would you see it as a treat or punishment in a bowl? 15. Blood sausage. Yes, really. In immigrant-heavy areas, orphanages sometimes serve blood sausage, made from animal blood, fat, and grain. For hungry kids, it was protein. For us today, it might feel more like fear factor food. 16 cold meat scraps. Butcher shops donated leftovers. Gristle, fat, and bits of meat, served cold on bread or crackers. It was called meat supper. Would you eat scraps without asking where they came from? These kids had no choice. 17 codfish cakes. Dried salted cod was mashed with potatoes and fried into patties. Cheap and filling, but extremely salty. Some kids loved them. Others couldn't stand the fishy aftertaste. Which camp would you be in? 18 vinegar pie. With no fruit or sugar. Cooks got creative. Vinegar pie used vinegar, flour, and a bit of sweetener to mimic lemon pie. Imagine biting into a sour dessert and pretending it was pie. Could you fool your taste buds? 19. Homestead hash. Leftovers from the week. Meat bits, potatoes, and onions were chopped up and fried into a hash. Some kids considered it the best meal of the week. Would you call it comfort food? Or chaos food? 20 turnip soup. When potatoes ran out, turnips stepped in. Boiled into a watery soup, they gave a bitter, earthy flavor that kids often hated. Imagine slurping this 3 nights in a row. 21 stewed tomatoes and bread. Cheap canned tomatoes simmered until mushy. Poured over slices of bread. It was tangy, soggy, and filling. Would you call that dinner? Or a kitchen accident? 22 pickled beets. Donated from farms or canned in bulk. Pickled beets were sour, messy, and bright red. Kids often joked their tongues turned purple for hours. Would you eat it? Or hide your portion under the table? 23 scrambled eggs with powdered milk. Eggs were rare, but when they appeared, they were scrambled with reconstituted powdered milk. The texture was rubbery, the flavor chalky. Still, for orphans, it was a breakfast worth remembering. 24 apple brown Betty. Finally, a treat worth smiling about. Leftover bread layered with sliced apples, sprinkled with sugar, and baked into a pudding. For kids, this dessert was magic. One bite of sweetness in a life of routine. 25 mystery meatloaf. And here's the grand finale. The infamous orphanage meatloaf. Nobody really knew what was inside. Scraps of beef, pork, breadcrumbs, and whatever else was on hand. Some kids swore it tasted different every single week. Would you risk a bite? So there you have it. 25 meals from American orphanages 100 years ago. From cornmeal mush to mystery meatloaf. Every dish tells a story of survival, sacrifice, and resilience. It's a reminder that food isn't just about flavor. It's about history, culture, and the human spirit. If this trip back in time stirred your imagination, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which of these meals would you actually try? And which one would you never touch in a million years? Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves hidden history. This has been Back Then with Ben, bringing the past back to the table, one story at a time.